Hello everyone, it's time after a long while to make another worst to best video, and this one will go through the discography of the German death industrial and power electronics group by the name of Genocide Organ. This is probably one of the very first names you might come across when it comes to power electronics, as Genocide Organ is arguably one of the most pivotal groups in the scene, masters in their craft, and this might be a video a lot of you might be looking forward to. It took me a while to really get into Genocide Organ's approach to the noise territory, but I can easily say that this group has created some of the most essential albums the scene has to offer. Their content is heavily political, filled with grimness and a heavily unsettling tone, often going through the themes of race, war and culture, and being really effective on capturing those dark points of humanity in a raw, unfiltered and unforgiving manner. This extreme way of showcasing their themes has led to a ton of controversy when it comes to the actual political beliefs of the members, whether it comes from a place of utter disgust to anything war-related or a glorification of those extremities, and understandably so, since the group has kept it a secret over all of those years on what their actual beliefs are. From the very few interviews of the group, their answers to those claims are extremely vague, which I consider to be kind of oxymoron, being a group primarily focusing on political conflicts, wars, etc., and not come forward whether those themes come from a place of disgust or glorification. To me, their music and atmosphere speaks volumes to anti-war, anti-imperialism, something that I'm all for. I consider myself to be a leftist, and I'm not afraid to say it. I've got nothing to hide. If anything, I try to become more clear with my works, what I stand for, and what I do not condone. So, if Genocide Organ primarily focus on politics, but hide their political identity, I think it's pretty understandable to have some concerns, and why people have been skeptical whether it's another case of a fascist group. I understand where they are coming from, because in my opinion, if you are in the right side of history, you don't hide with cryptic riddles and leave everything up to interpretation. Even with all that being said, I have to admit that the effect on depicting the horrors of war, the misanthropy in display, is some of the greatest I have ever experienced in music. The atmosphere and mood it creates is so harrowing and has been a staple for many artists to follow in the future. So in this video I'm going to talk about the full-length albums and rank them from worst to best. It's going to exclude compilations, live albums, EPs or 7-inch records, and with all that being said, let's dive deep into the menacing and ruthless world that is created by the wondrous sounds of Genocide Organ. At first, my pick for the worst Genocide Organ album is going to be Death Zones, released at the end of 2023. This is the longest work of the group, a double album that goes for a bit more than 80 minutes long, and I'll say that this is the main album they've done that overstays its welcome. But even if it was shorter, this right here has some of the most uninteresting stuff the group has ever put out. Considering the intense political climate of the past couple of years, you would expect something more in your face and harsh, but it comes off more as a run-of-the-mill power electronics project that makes an attempt to imitate the old sound of Genocide Organ. With such titles such as Identity Politics, Affirmative Action and Virtue Signaling, it reads more like an online politics fair. It kinda misses the mark, which by itself it's not a bad thing. I mean, online politics has had a pivotal role in the past couple of years, but it's more something that you would expect from a more recent power electronics project rather than Genocide Organ that have been toying with this stuff for lots of years prior to this. Now, if you're huge fans of Genocide Organ, you'll probably enjoy this much more, and there are some good, powerful moments to enjoy, but for me at least, this feels like their weakest collection of ideas out of the latest era, with too many tracks, but still feels like there's not actually that much to unpack. It's not a bad album, it's pretty serviceable, but considering the status of Genocide Organ, this is certainly not a strong starting point, in my opinion. At number 10 is the very limited album Save Our Slaves, probably the least known album of Genocide Organ, only released in 1991 in limited edition box sets. There has never been a reissue since, and it's not easily available. It might be considered a mini album, but screw it, I put it on the list anyway. This is more of a collector's piece for those who want to listen to everything from Genocide Organ, but if you are not one of those people, you're not really missing much. Giving a huge emphasis on the packaging of this one, this is one of the first releases they've put out, and this one feels more like a shock value piece. At the front cover shows the burning of a black man, and the inserts also seem to be packed with other delightful images. Considering the extremity of its content, you might imagine that the music is as extreme, but on the contrary, this might be the most chill album in their catalog. It goes more into the death industrial territory, but still feels like it's missing that punch to make the ideas more captivating. For the most part, we're talking about a more minimal album with lots of monotone drone passages and dark ambient undertone to them. This is a direction that I think has made for far better results in their side projects Anencephalia and Cahill that were formed later down the line. This release over here feels like it relies more on the substance of its contents, but doesn't resonate that well with the more lackluster side that we got with the music. At number 9 is going to be the latest installment of the group that was just released this year, Operations with Contempt. This one right here compared to Death Zones feels more polished and having a greater understanding what has made their work shine over the years. Really heavy and dynamic album with great production with some really nice mechanical and industrial elements throughout and a strong first half, but unfortunately the second half of this album is kind of a bummer. After some really cool cuts at the beginning, it doesn't really keep the momentum going. This is another album that I'm pretty sure fans of Genocide Organ are going to enjoy. It's worth your time, but just expect more of the same at the end of the day. And even if this album is pretty fresh, I don't feel that this position is going to change anytime soon, since the impact of the older stuff is hard to match. At number 8 is going to be In-Konflikt, one of the most well-known and classic albums of the group. This one probably comes the closest to have this militarized feel in its entirety, with monotone industrial rhythmic sections being part of the skeleton of this album's structure. This is one of those projects that in my opinion doesn't really have some massive highlights to it or standout moments. What I do like about In-Konflikt though is that it all flows like one continuous piece. There are no distinct cuts, so it seamlessly flows from one track to the next. This is a very solid aspect of this album and one of the strongest characteristics to an album that may not have that many standout individual moments to pick apart, but as a whole thing, it really gets the job done. Then at number 7 we have the album The Truth Will Make You Free. Compared to the other stuff that the group released in the late 80s and 90s, this album right here might feel a bit more ferocious and a bit less straightforward, but it also lacked some of the fundamentals that make their previous work so special, such as the clever use of minimal instrumentation with a ton of sampling. There are still some really creative moments over here, certainly feels more polished and less lackluster than what In-Konflikt did, but this is another one of those albums that falls under the category of simply decent serviceable projects that get the job done and are recommended to anyone who wants to get into their catalog. It's a pretty good release through its entirety. At number 6 is the self-titled album released in 2003 with a title in Japanese. This is an archival release containing a collection of songs recorded between 1985 to 1990 and was supposed to be their second album released in Japan between Leichenlinie and Save Our Slaves, and it's all in Japanese in order to commemorate their first live appearance in Japan in 2003. Usually I don't put archivals in videos like this, but this is all new previously unreleased material, so I'll make it count. These recordings are a bit rough, they lack that intensity just like with Save Our Slaves, but at least the ideas over here are far more compelling. It's more of a death industrial album, and its overall aesthetic and sound were really ahead of their time. Lots of solid moments, with the most notable of them all being the incredible finisher Und Morgen die ganze Welt, a minimal, melodic and moody 11-minute track that I would go as far as to say that this is one of the greatest tracks Genocide Organ have ever done in their entire career. Absolutely brilliant. At number 5 is going to be Under-Kontrakt. This one, in comparison to their previous works, picks it up a notch in terms of intensity, having a more visceral sound of power electronics while still keeping the heavy dark atmosphere and of course the rich sampling, which I would say is the most well put together since Mind Control. Alongside some sick vocal effects and manipulations that have been a staple for power electronics over the years, Under-Kontrakt manages to be one of their most compelling works from start to finish, and also one of their most varied ones, with some of the most intense moments and others that seem to pay homage to more old-school works that have put them on the spot as one of the most essential power electronics groups out there, one of the strongest recommendations, in my opinion, from their overall catalogue. Then at number 4 is going to be the very next album after Under-Kontrakt, Obituary of the Americas. I would say that this is probably the most intense and most ruthless album they've ever put out. Another case of a heavily militarized, disturbing sound with some of the most iconic sampling moments with tracks such as Formation de Guerrilla and a constant nightmarish undertone with gunfire and screams all over this thing. Another album that doesn't have anything that you wouldn't expect, but the vocals and the production is some of the best we've seen in the group. Kind of a more one-dimensional album as it's ruthless from start to finish, but this is part of its appeal. It's just that it doesn't have those distinct changes of tones with less intense tracks that make the next 3 releases on this list to really stand out. At number 3 is going to be their collaboration with Prurient, Carte Blanche. With the longest album gap in their career, this collaboration is what you would expect from two of the masters in power electronics, and it's awesome for that. I would say that this feels more of like a Genocide Organ release than a Prurient one, but whatever the case is, the chemistry is definitely there, with a densely packed album filled with tons of great industrial and mechanical elements, solid sound throughout, a constant grim and devastating atmosphere, resulting to what I consider to be one of the best albums from both Genocide Organ and Prurient. If you haven't heard of this already, just don't expect anything mind-blowing, but I still consider this to be way more than just serviceable. It's two masters of their craft doing what they do best, which is why Death Zones comes even more of a shock being released in the same year. It makes it even more apparent that this was a bunch of ideas being thrown together, because Carte Blanche right here really knows how to take the old school power electronic sound and make it feel as fresh to this day. At number 2 is where we get to the really great stuff, with their second album, Mind Control. I would say that this one is the best and most creative when it comes to its sampling. It's the richest one in this regard. It's filled with so many different speed samples, and it's the main aspect that gives character to each and every one of those songs and make them stand out one from each other. The most notable example of a song that is immaculate in its execution is the introduction, Burn, with its sampling looping over with those pitches on top of each other and all of the surrounding feedback adding nicely to this nightmarish atmosphere. Another song that I consider one of the best they've ever done is At Judas, with one of the most iconic vocal deliveries I can think of in a power electronics project. It's this really nice balance between noise and ambience and really imaginative, especially with its sample usage. Definitely one of the strongest recommendations, not just for Genocide Organ, but for Death Industrial and power electronics in general. And finally at number 1, it is one to be expected. It's their 1989 debut, Leichenlinie. Everything that I said at the beginning about the group and their impact on the scene mostly applies to this album right here. To this day, there haven't really been any other power electronics projects that are this outstanding, this devastating, and this raw from start to finish. A heavily lo-fi release that goes from ruthless minimal cuts to gloomy atmospheric ones in the blink of an eye. Extremely creative with its various vocal manipulations and once again the imaginative sampling. This album also contains one of the greatest and most sickening tracks of all time in my opinion, Thought. From the avant-garde structure to the torturous screams, the haunting ambience, the sound of metal, it sounds like sheer pain and agony, and it's so effective on being a powerful and heavy track. If it wasn't apparent from the album cover displaying a bunch of corpses, this album is really brutal. This is extremity at its finest. The scenes of war, agony, and terror in display is something that many other groups over the years have tried to replicate, but almost never to the same amount of succession. This is undoubtedly one of the most essential albums in the scene, ahead of its time, unapologetically raw and visceral, and one of my personal favorite albums of all time. You rarely get albums like this one. And this is my ranking of the Genocide Organ albums from worst to best. Let me know your thoughts and ranking down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.